Question for you. What do some of the largest financial institutions have to do with the JFK assassination, the moon landing, and the Titanic? Little hint, predictions. Now, you probably all had a conversation with a friend or a colleague over the water cooler conversation or at the bar. But guess what? Financial institutions also have predictions about the stock market. Let's talk about what to do with them and what not to do with them. Let's go. Welcome into Mindset, as we talk about all things has to do with your money and how you think about it. It's really important to know why you are doing what you are doing with your money. And on this show today, we're going to talk about predictions. I don't know about you, Jared, but what comes up to me is the Yogi Barrett quote, right? He's always got these little classic, right? I think his was, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. Like you're just,
It's deep. That's deep.
It's very deep, okay? But we're going to talk about that because I think at the onset of the shows you saw, there's some interesting predictions that have happened to some serious events in history, and then making the correlation that every year people, whether they know it consciously or subconsciously, there's predictions being made about the stock market. What do you think about predictions in general?
I try never to listen to them.
I tend to agree. But you know what's interesting because
I never get any good ones. I never get good ones. They're always bad.
Oh, well, you get bad predictions.
It's never like, I'm going to predict you're going to win $1 million.
It's always like something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. You're going to get hit by a car. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good. You know, it's interesting because we were talking about this, right? There are actually some wild predictions that I guess you can call came true. So check this out. Now, at the start of the show, we talked about, how big financial institutions have to do with the moon landing, the assassination of JFK, and the Titanic. Now, I know that seemed like a crazy hook, but look, to be candid with you, Jared and I were kind of nerding out on some things on this, and it's kind of wild. So get this. So in 1956, there was a psychic named Jan Dixon, sorry for the Dixon family if I got this wrong, who writes about a Democratic president who was elected in 1960 that would be assassinated while in office. She made this prediction in 1956. 4 years later, in 1960, JFK was shot in Dallas.
Crazy.
Wild, right?
Yeah.
So it goes further, okay? 1898, all right, there was an author named Morgan Robertson, that's a much easier name to say that I can pronounce, writes a novella called Futility, in which a grand unsinkable ship named the Titan hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks. Now, 14 years after that, the RMS Titanic hits an iceberg, sinks in the North Atlantic. In 1865, Jules Verne's release of his novel From the Earth to the Moon, it detailed specifically a mission to the moon where a 3-person crew riding a large cylindrical capsule, is what he wrote, shaped like a bullet, would launch from Florida. I mean, this is how specific this prediction was. From Florida and splash in the Pacific Ocean after returning. Now, this one's wild because this was 100 years before we landed on the moon.
Yeah, that's crazy. And they say that his calculations for how to get there to break the Earth's atmosphere were remarkably close.
Like, that's crazy to me. I mean, think about this. That time period, people are still running around on horse and buggy. And yet this guy's over here saying we're going to go to the moon?
Yeah, pretty crazy.
Wild. So, I mean, look, yes, predictions can come true, and I'm sure you've had some things. And I'm curious, have you ever had a prediction that you've been told, maybe it's good or bad, I don't know, in your life that's come true? Let us know, because it's interesting, right? Because there's also other ones that don't. And I'll be honest with you, as a seasoned and experienced financial advisor of 20 years in the financial services industry, a little bit more, I typically find when you make predictions about money or the stock market, they're not always like spot on. like almost, and I'm going to talk about a few today because they're actually important and how it has to look for 2025, because we have all this information and it's like when it comes to your money, you got to be really careful with that. What's important here, and as we get into the show, is what's getting in, right? That's what matters. You hear me say this all the time. In fact, I even think I said it last week on another subject. It's not the water around a boat that sinks the ship. It's the water that gets in. This is a little apropos to the Titanic situation. But interesting, right? So I want to talk about what the predictions are for 2025. If you clicked on this video and you're a subscriber and a listener to us, we always thank you for watching. And I think, when we look at these kind of things and what to look at in 2025, I think let's start with, we'll call it the quote unquote experts. So I want to show you some things here that I think will have a lot to do with how we can perceive some predictions in 2025.
Let's do it.
So as we talk about predictions, let's just go to some of the reports. I pulled this one up. This was actually done on December 19th, so about a month ago. But the title of this one from Morningstar, which I think is a good reputable source to look at, was Could the S&P 500 Close at 7,000? Now for reference point, we're just below 6,000 or right around there. Let's take a look at this. So as we talk about large, reputable financial institutions, here's what I'm talking about. So right in here in the middle of this, we talked about the Wall Street firm, 2025, the S&P 500 target. You notice all of them are above 6,000. I think that's an important thing to note because there's not a negative one on there from a current standpoint from where we are as of the filming of this show. Now you got some outliers, right? You got these 7,000 bad boys up here at Deutsche Bank and Yardeni and Oppenheimer, but most of them are right in this 67 to like 6,500 rank. I mean, some notable names in there are obviously Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, UPS, Goldman. You got a bunch of people in there. Now, when you talk about predictions and you think about it, number one, it's very important you hear this loud and clear. These are not actually what is going to happen. I know that might sound crazy you hearing me say that, but I think some people out there need to know that, okay? Everything I'm saying here is hypothetical, and I'm not even saying this. These are basically research firms and the banks talking about it. So as I mentioned, you have predictions, you have friends who predict things, good or bad. There are analysts in these large institutions that do the same thing. Now, I found it interesting and why I pulled up this report, because as I was looking through this, I think it's kind of interesting to see what happened in 2024. Now, what's interesting about this is that the S&P 500, most of the analysts were reporting in 2023 that the S&P 500 was going to close at 4,800 by the end of 2024. They were way off. Now, this was done by FactSet Data, so that was the resource kind of went through it. I mean, they were widely off. I mean, their price return for the index was 18% off. They underestimated it by that much. My point in saying this is we kind of let off with the show with predictions can sometimes come true, and there's some things about it. This is what I've found is that predictions, you got to be careful with them, all right? Because as it relates to your money, they don't have a crystal ball. And by the way, if anyone you're following, listening to, reading up on has this is going to happen because this reason and this reason, like just take it with a grain of salt. Like this is really important, and a great intro to kind of say this is like meet with your advisor and talk about the planning. If you're just looking at what's going to happen in this quarter or this year, you got to be able to kind of understand like how that fits into your next year and the year after that. Maybe you're in your mid-40s, your mid-career, you're talking about your investments, say, okay, I watched this guy on YouTube and he's talking about 2025's stock market predictions and most of them are up. What do I do with that information? That's important stuff to talk about. Now, going back to that for a second, these numbers here, if you do a percentage basis, are loosely right around 6 to 7%. Some are a little bit higher. So from an S&P 500 projection, hypothetical, they're saying that we're going to see 6 to 7% rate of return in 2025. I'm not saying that's going to happen or not, but it's interesting to note that all of them are positive. Now, we talked about the stock market. Now, I'm not a big believer in talking about individual stocks. I do believe in diversification, something we're going to talk about here, but it's hard to ignore the Magnificent Seven. If you don't know what the Magnificent Seven are, they're the largest 7 companies right now that are most notable. Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla. You can see them all here. This is their 2024 year-to-date performance, so this was last year. Doesn't mean it's what's going to happen this year by any means, but like I said, with predictions, you kind of look backwards to look forwards a little bit. Look at all of them that were positive. I mean, to me, the one that sticks out, obviously, is NVIDIA. It's the AI play, something we'll talk about here in a minute. But what I find interesting about this, and it's important to note, is that when we're talking about the S&P 500, fun fact for you, there's a little bit more or less than 500 companies, not exactly, but they're the largest 500 companies in the United States. Now, that's interesting because if you're at having a beer with a friend or someone brings it up somehow like, oh, how's the stock market doing? Or how's the market? People refer to it. They're typically referring to the S&P 500 because we know that as the broad market indicator. I'm going to challenge that a little bit, and I've been challenging that over the past couple years, and here's why. These 7 companies right here make up 35% of the S&P 500. Friends, that is a huge amount. But what I think is really interesting with all this is because, A, you'll now know, you can act smart with your friends now because it's pretty interesting, but it leads us to the conversation about concentration versus diversification. Now, anyone who's watched or followed me for a long time or any clients listening here, I'm a big believer in diversification. And I'm totally aware of how much of an overused word that is, but it matters because you got a huge portion here making up an index, and it's really 7 companies driving it. So I think it's interesting to note, you got to look at the equal weighted S&P 500, and the numbers are vastly different. Just a little fun fact for you, but talk with your advisor about that. Look through that and make sure you know what you're benchmarking your maybe diversified portfolio against. Now, we've talked about the market and some individual companies. We talked about predictions. I'm going to go into a few others here because the 2 main assets that we have typically is stocks, whether it's through ETFs or mutual funds, and whether it's in a 401k or otherwise, and mortgages or a house. And I think it'd be remiss if we didn't bring up when we talk about predictions where we see mortgage rates and what we're to look at. And I think to do that, I wanted to bring up our good friend, Larry O'Shea, who's president of OCM Funding. Larry, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, Barrett, great to be here.
You know, like we were talking about pre-show, we're having a lot of predictions, and again, these are hypotheticals. And I think as we start off this new year, being in the middle of January, you know, a lot of these houses, Fannie Mae, CNBC, they're forecasting that average year 30-year fixed rates will fluctuate between, you know, 5 3/4 and 7 1/4, and it's, you know, that's a pretty big margin for them to be pretty conservative on, right? But I just want to kind of get your take and the stuff that we've talked about with clients.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, Brett. It's a question I get a lot. The number one question is always, where's the rates? And then, you know, obviously that depends on a bunch of different things. It depends on the day. Then the second question is, you know, where the rates going to be next year? Where are they going to be in 2025? Are they going to be better? Are they going to be worse? And then a lot of people, we've talked about this all the time, you and I do. It's like people hear, oh, the Fed's lowered the rates. Well, the Fed rate's a different rate.
Yeah.
You've, I'm sure, informed your clients. You know, the reason I think that there's such a wide gap that the quote unquote experts are putting on that, you know, 5 3/4 up to 7 1/4 is it's you know, there's a new administration coming in. There's a new Fed chairman, most likely. You know, predicting those numbers is very difficult. You know, from everything that I've seen, up until about late November, they were calling for the Fed rates to go down, you know, 100 basis points next year. And while those don't directly tell us what the mortgage rates are, they tell us they give us an idea of where they're going to go, and they're going to go down. And what tends to happen in the bond market that does actually determine the rates is people they're basically banking on anticipation, and they hear numbers. And you know what happened, I think it was December 18th was the last Fed meeting when they came out and they lowered the Fed funds rate by 1/4. And the immediate reaction in the bond market, the mortgage-backed security bond market, was it trashed the rates.
It blew up. We're crazy.
And everybody says, you know, the phone rings off the hook. Hey, I heard it's down another 1/4%. I'm like, well, the Fed funds, that's an overnight rate. That is down. The mortgage rates actually bumped up.
I want to talk about that for a second, not to interject, but I think it's really good for our viewers to hear that because I don't think they're hearing it a lot. When you see a federal funds rate being lowered, in very simple terms, how would you describe the difference between the Fed funds rate and what we see being quote unquote lowered, and how that doesn't directly transfer to, you know, Jim and Mary Smith going in to getting a mortgage?
In normal circumstances, it doesn't directly, they don't walk in lockstep. Lately, they've been even worse. They've been, you know, and all it is it's an overnight rate. And what happened back in December, on December 18th, was, yes, it went down, but the Fed came out and they were hawkish on where things are going to go next year. So while as of, I believe it was their November meeting, it may have been the October meeting, they said, oh, it's going to be 100 basis points. We're going to lower it next year on the Fed funds rate. They came out on December 18th of the end of last year and basically said, we're going 50 basis points. And out of the 19 Fed chairmen, 10 of them said that. And basically that's where it's going to go next year. So what happened was all the people that hold these bonds basically said, whoa, wait. So they jumped out. And so I think the short-term effect is going to be the rates will have spiked up a little bit and then they'll probably come down. You know, I'm a little more, I don't know if you would call it precise in what I tell people as far as an estimation of where I think the rates are going to go. I think it's probably going to be averaging around, you know, once things settle out, once the new administration comes in, once things, you know, people understand, the bond traders, everybody understands where things are going, you know, what's going to happen with these tariffs that are being talked about. You know, is that going to cause inflation? Inflation's bad for the, you know, for the bonds. So I think I'm looking at, and a lot of the experts that I'm looking at are looking at in the probably 6 1/4 to 6.5 range. Now, I think there's
Okay.
going to be some times there's going to be some great opportunities where it's going to jump down. It's going to bump down into possibly even maybe the high fives. But I think generally we should plan on probably the 6.25 to 6.5 range for next year.
I think that's good. I mean, again, like all things, predictions and forecasts, a lot can happen. We're sitting here in January. I appreciate that because that's the take we wanted to get. Larry, thank you so much for your time. We're going to have him on again, so everyone stay tuned for that. But I appreciate for your time. Thanks again, Larry.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Always good talking with Larry. What do you think, Jared? You're a homeowner.
That was great.
Yeah.
I'm a new homeowner for the first time. We bought about 4 years ago.
Okay.
Never really looked at mortgage rates. Now I constantly look at mortgage rates.
Isn't that wild? Like before, it's almost like, BC and AD. It's like it wasn't ever on your radar. Now all of a sudden you become a homeowner and it's like the only thing you talk about.
Yeah, because I'm always thinking about what's my home's value.
Yeah.
Can I do an add-on? Can I do this? Can I take a HELOC loan? We're always looking at it. We're always talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think when we talk about the market, some of the individual securities, we talked about the Magnificent Seven. I think that's probably on most people's minds, right? I'm a homeowner as well. It's like it's constantly you're thinking about it. And I think over the past 2 years in particular, it's been thrown in our face with this historic exponential rise. Like we haven't seen that before. Most people don't realize like the rise we had over the past 20 or so odd months in interest rates was historic.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a steep increase. Now, one thing I was bringing up with Larry too, and we've talked about this privately, but a couple of years ago when you talk about these rates, remember the word artificial? It was like artificially low. Like we all just glanced over that adjective. They were artificial. It was a whole thing about supply and demand. It was a whole thing about monetary policy and putting money into the system. When you put that much money into the system, you're going to push rates down and have artificially low, which also stems to things like inflation and recession, which I think we should talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's funny now. People are like 7%, 8%. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look back, I mean, I've heard stories of my parents and aunts and uncles buying houses at 18, 20.
Oh, in the 80s, like with the Fed, with Volcker, and heading into Reagan, like what Volcker did in the 80s when it comes to inflation and rates, and that was actually pretty impressive because the federal funds rate is one tool. I think just to be clear before we end this idea off of mortgage rates and the Fed funds rate, something that Larry was alluding to, is remember that's only one tool with the Federal Open Market Committee's toolbox. Like they can do some of the things, but it's also controlling the money supply. Most people don't look at it like that, but that's a big factor as well. And in the 80s, like you're talking about, right, there was 13, 14%, 15, 18% mortgages, but it's relative to some extent because there was also 9 or 10% CDs.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of balancing out. That's why it's interesting to look at history as well as current day.
And a couple cool facts I read. Zillow. Everyone should know the name Zillow right now in real estate.
That's probably a big one.
Houses. Yeah. They're seeing a raise in what they call cozy or small housing. Small housing market is going to be growing. People are looking to downsize. People want to spend less. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, makes sense.
Also saying the new hot market is going to be the Southwest. People going to the desert. I have no idea why. I hate the desert.
Is it weird to me that when you said that, all I think of is Will Ferrell's character at the end of The Office with his like turquoise jewelry. Remember when Michael Scott left and they had like these different Idris Elba was in there, Will Ferrell was in there, all these different cats. He was like a huge lover of the Southwest.
Turquoise is going to be on the rise.
Apparently, you're going to start getting turquoise jewelry. So we talked about inflation, and right now, as you look into 2025, a lot of the analysts are looking at GDP forecasted to expand by 2.7%. This is from Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs in particular, has price core inflation should slow to 2.4%. Fun fact for y'all, and this is a good example of like how our brains think, like myopically, we only look at what's happening today. We have like kind of short-term memory. We're not elephants here, all right? It's funny because if you think about it, the 30-year average is still hovering right around 3%. I said that to a client the other day and they were like, no way. And I'm like, yeah. Now, it doesn't feel like it, but it is.
No, because we're constantly getting bombarded with, fear-mongering
Totally.
about how bad everything is.
Totally. It's crazy. I want to switch gears for a second. Let's have some fun. I've thrown a lot of numbers at you. So the tech world. Solar energy will become the largest source of energy on the planet. That's a prediction.
Probably not, but love it. Big green energy guy.
You watching Landman?
Yeah.
Dude.
Love it.
You haven't watched Landman, it's pretty good. Watch, it's a good show. Totally sidebar. By 2025, this is what it was, the impact of artificial intelligence may peak, fundamentally altering job markets, economies, and daily life. That was a general prediction from a lot of different expert companies. Now, I'm not a big AI, I'm new to the AI game, and quite honestly, I still like the authentic, yellow pad writing it down. When you get an email from me, it's actually written by me. I could tell when someone's writing an AI email,
AI, I've seen it in the entertainment industry, the arts. It's scary how fast it's putting people out of business.
I agree with you. And I will say this, when it comes to our world of financial advising and investing, people think, oh, I'll just ask AI what they think is going to happen or how to manage it. And look, to be candid with you, it's obviously smart. It's a supercomputer. It's basically pulling from all different resources. Even me out there in the universe talking about things, it'll pull from things I might say, right? It's pulling from everything. But when something happens, that phone call that keeps sound, of mind, again, the psychology is always something that I don't think a computer can take over.
But like, what if you had an app that said, here's $100, I don't know, put in a percentage, like I want to see it grow 1% over a year, and you could just walk away and it could guarantee that.
I don't think it could guarantee, by the way, if that word out there or anything, be very careful, friends. Anytime the G word to me is a troublesome one. When you guarantee anything, especially in the investment world, that's scary. That's why, I'm a big, look, you probably see all of our disclosures and everything like that. Like, we're just spitballing here, right? It's interesting, and we're going to see some things like that, but I just will always go back to it. And look, I've seen enough in my 20 years already of technology changes, of how this works, from a lot of different ways. And I may be proven wrong. You might have some things to say as well. Having that person to call and just kind of give you the sound counsel that's not a computer or not spitting out some, I don't know. I still think it's there.
Well, I always tell people AI will never replace plumbers and electricians. And
the trades are, I totally agree with that.
Trades are safe.
That's 100% true. You came across some interesting ones, didn't you?
Oh, I found a couple really fun ones. A little scary.
Ooh, fun. Let's go.
Nostradamus.
Yeah.
You've heard?
Yeah.
He had some 2025 predictions.
He had 2025 predictions?
2025 predictions.
Okay.
Severe global challenges. Quote, the ancient plague will be worse than enemies.
Eesh.
Indicating Europe may face another pandemic along with cruel wars. So Europe, be careful. Watch out.
Jeez.
A woman by the name of Baba Vanga.
Say that 5 times fast.
A blind Bulgarian oracle, often called the Nostradamus of the Balkans.
Did you find this?
So she's legit to me. I'm
She's legit. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I like it.
I'm invested. She said the end times will begin in 2025. Foresaw a catastrophic war in Europe. So that's 2 for Europe. Just watch out.
Yikes.
Not all doom and gloom from Baba.
Oh, yeah? Some positivity, finally. Why are all predictions like this so negative?
That's why I like Baba. She's got some good ones
okay.
here. Could be the year humanity makes contact with aliens.
Dude, that's wild. What's going on in Jersey last month? Remember that?
Possibly during a major sporting event. So you're at the ball game, look up, you never know. And Brad, you're a sports guy.
I am.
Who do you got for World Series in 2025, the winner?
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna go Dodgers, and I'm gonna take a wild stab on this one. I'm gonna go Detroit Tigers.
That's weird. Bleacher Report came out with an article, their predictions. They have number one Dodgers versus number 3 Detroit Tigers. That's pretty good.
You want to hire me, Bleacher Report? I might have something for you there.
You gotta side.
They're looking. It's the reason why I made that guess, but interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice job. That's maybe you should be making some.
I do like sports. It's kind of. If you don't know something about me, I'm a huge sports radio buff. Here in LA, I just like. It's weird. I like music as well, obviously, but sometimes it's always a struggle between me and music and sports radio.
And I know you're a hockey guy.
Big time.
Big hockey guy. Who you got for Stanley Cup?
Ooh, okay. I know I sound biased here, obviously being an LA kid, but the Kings. I actually do feel like we got deep enough. Darcy and Nets looking pretty good as long as he can stay healthy. We got some good deep defense. So got to put my Kings in there. Look, the Capitals are looking good. So I'm going to go Kings Capitals.
I've got a prediction for the winner, according to Greg Wisniewski. Sorry for the pronunciation.
Oh, yeah, he's a big guy on ESPN, yeah.
At ESPN.
Yep.
He's got the Dallas Stars for the win.
Really?
Stars for the championship. Athletic poll had Oilers winning it, but I did not see anyone predicting the Kings. So
I know. You got to like bust my, like, you know, Winnipeg was up pretty good in Jersey. There's some East Coast teams that'll make it. But so look, predictions are what they are, friends. Obviously, some of those that might sound doom and gloom, please don't react or overreact to some of these. Look, there's a lot of numbers and a lot of things to digest. Here's what I'm going to say about predictions in general. There's an old economist years ago that I remember listening to, and I loved what he said. He said, our job as money managers, and in his case, economists, is to be less wrong more often. And I found that always interesting because these predictions we're talking about, they're not trying to be right. They're just trying to be less wrong more often. And it stuck with me. They're not batting 1,000 here. You know, they're not trying to shoot, you know, just be correct all the times. And everything we talk about here on our show, just to be clear, these predictions, or even last week, talking about how elections, you know, play into stock markets. I mean, we're doing this because my role in what I do for clients is largely about making sure not only you're okay with your money, but your family's okay with your money. Everyone wants to create that generational wealth. And let me be clear with you. You don't have to be a bajillionaire to create generational wealth. Breaking generational habits, creating new positive generational habits, leaving anything is a part of generational wealth. So as we talk about predictions, I mean, I'll leave you with this quote that I thought was really good that Jared and I were kind of talking about before. It's attributed to Abraham Lincoln. Not entirely sure it was him, but it's attributed to him. So the best way to predict the future is to create it. So there's an old coach that used to tell me, you have two ways to look at things. You can describe and manage it, or declare and fulfill it. We talked about JFK. Right before his passing, he talked about the moon landing, which is kind of a tie-in here between those two, which is why I brought it up, and I want to end on that. He declared that we, the United States, would land on the moon. We didn't even have, NASA wasn't even organized yet. It was called something different. We had no technology, nothing. We manifested it. So declaring and fulfilling in your life, if you're sitting here today in January 2025, say, I'm going to get my finances in order. I'm going to pay off my debt. I'm going to start investing. Here's the thing. Find the difference between motivation and discipline, because you might feel really hoorah-rah, new year, new you, and that's really great. Find counsel, find an advisor to help you with it, because there will be tough days. There will be days when you don't feel like doing it anymore. There will be days when the noise comes in, you're like, I'd rather just buy this now for temporary enjoyment versus long-term enjoyment. It's really, really important.
Absolutely.
I want to thank everybody for joining today. Always remember to subscribe. Leave a comment for us. We'd love to hear the topics you want to hear about. Let us know how we're doing. It's always good to hear feedback. And as always, if you lead with love, everything's going to be all right. I think it's important. We'll see you next week. We're going to be talking about tariffs. What do they mean? What are they? It's a huge word going around right now. No one really knows. I'm going to just go through with you. And I think it's important to know why it actually matters to you. With that, have a great week. And always remember, let it rain.